Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're unpacking a massive, heavyweight intellectual clash that is quite literally defining the future of our global economy. We're looking at two radically different visions for human progress: directed growth versus degrowth. So let's dive right in. It all boils down to one absolutely crucial question, and it forms the core of our deep dive today. Is infinite growth actually possible on a finite planet? It's a dilemma that forces us to try and reconcile traditional economic theory with the very real, hard boundaries of our survival. Right now, we're caught in this intense tug of war. On one hand, you have the immense promise of economic growth. Over the last 2 centuries, it's been this miraculous engine, freeing billions of people from poverty and giving us longer, healthier lives. But pulling us in the exact opposite direction is the devastating price of that very same growth. We're talking severe environmental destruction and rapidly deepening global inequalities. So we're just being wrenched in two different directions at once. Section 1. The invention of GDP, a modern obsession. To really understand our modern obsession with economic growth, we actually have to look backward. For millennia, humanity lived in what's known as the long stagnation. Economic progress was practically zero. Then, boom, the 1800s brought the Industrial Revolution. But here's the crazy part. Our primary metric for success today, GDP, it wasn't even invented until the 1940s. It was literally just a way for governments to figure out how much of the economy they could slice off to fund World War II. And then, during the Cold War, it sort of morphed into a proxy to measure who was winning. Think about that. It was never actually designed to measure human well-being in the first place.
The growth dilemma, the limits of endless expansion. That historical baggage brings us directly to the crisis we're in right now. Inheriting this relentless pursuit of a single metric has backed us into a really dangerous corner. The blind pursuit of higher GDP has brought us extreme ecological breakdown, accelerating climate change and widening wealth gaps. We are quite literally outgrowing the planet.
So does this mean we just have to stop growing completely? Economist Daniel Susskind argues no. I actually love the analogy he uses here. He says we shouldn't just obsess over the speed of the boat, putting the sails up to go faster or pulling them down to go slower. Crucially, as sailors, we possess the agency to steer. We can choose an entirely new direction on the open sea.
The case for directed growth, harnessing the infinite.
And this brings us to Susskind's central thesis. He argues we shouldn't abandon growth. Rather, we must actively redirect it. The crucial point here is that growth doesn't actually have to be dirty. Through something he calls directed technological progress, we can use smart policies, carbon taxes, and targeted R&D to deliberately steer our economies away from those polluting technologies and point them toward clean ones. We are in the driver's seat of our own innovation. Here's exactly why Susskind believes endless growth is possible. Usually, when we think of growth, we assume it requires a shovel, right? Extracting more finite physical resources like soil, oil, and minerals. But true growth actually comes from the brain. It comes from the infinite universe of human ideas and ingenuity. It's about finding entirely new, smarter ways to use the resources we already have.
To see this idea-driven growth in action, you just have to look at AlphaFold. This is an AI system developed by DeepMind that mapped the 3D structures of millions of proteins. It basically solved this immense biological puzzle that will absolutely revolutionize medicine for us. And the beautiful part? It achieved this massive leap in human progress purely through computing power and ideas, completely sidestepping mass physical resource depletion.
The case for degrowth, a reckoning with reality.
Okay, so that AI example sounds incredibly optimistic, right? Well, researcher Timothy Parikh forcefully pushes back on this, arguing that green growth is actually a dangerous illusion. Parikh points away from hypothetical future tech and straight towards some pretty terrifying hard data. Just look at the recent planetary health check. Earth has 9 critical planetary boundaries that keep our environment stable. We have already breached 7 of them. 7! We are in a state of severe ecological overshoot today. To really drive his point home, Parikh uses a stark analogy. He argues that relying on future tech to save a dying planet is entirely irrational. Think about it. If a doctor diagnoses you with lung cancer today, you wouldn't keep smoking just because someone might invent 3D printed lungs in 1,000 years, right? Obviously not. You have to treat the disease you have right now. This builds into Parikh's major critique of our current climate strategy, which he calls carbon tunnel vision. We tend to treat climate change like a Rubik's Cube, where we only focus on solving one single face, carbon emissions. So we push for millions of electric vehicles to lower that carbon. But solving that one face totally messes up another side of the cube, because those EVs require massive, incredibly destructive new mineral extraction from the Earth. To truly fix the whole Rubik's Cube, the whole system, Parikh proposes a structured transition across 3 dimensions. First up, an objection to growth. We have to stop treating GDP as a god. Second, actual degrowth, a planned democratic downscaling of production, specifically targeted at wealthy nations that are currently in overshoot. And third, post-growth, arriving at a steady-state economy focused on shared wealth and collective well-being, rather than just endless accumulation.
Measuring what we value, beyond the numbers. So we have 2 very different visions on the table. Out-innovating our limits versus a planned scale-down. How in the world do we synthesize this? Well, what's fascinating is that both Susskind and Parikh actually agree on one massive foundational point. Our mechanical obsession with GDP has got to end. GDP only measures sheer economic output. It is completely blind to morality. Both sides agree we need to shift our focus toward true social value, metrics that actually account for environmental health, equality, and genuine human flourishing. To get there, we literally have to put morality back into economics. Susskind argues that deciding between economic expansion and environmental protection isn't just a math equation, it's a moral trade-off. And we can't leave moral choices solely to technocrats and statisticians locked away in government basements. He proposes using things like mini-publics or citizen assemblies. This means empowering ordinary people to weigh in on these massive societal trade-offs and ultimately define the direction of our future. As we wrap up this explainer, I really want to leave you with a provocative thought. We know that GDP just isn't enough anymore. So if you were handed the keys tomorrow and asked to design a brand new dashboard for human progress, what metrics would you choose to actually measure a good life? Think about that for a second, because deciding what we measure ultimately decides what we become. Thanks so much for joining me, and I'll catch you in the next one.